How do you respond to critics who say that artists should just make music and stay out of politics altogether?
I'd say they don't know anything about art because that's art's job. It's literally in the job description.
Welcome to Assembly Required with Stacey Abrams from Crooked Media. I'm your host, Stacey Abrams. Music is a powerful tool. In an instant, it can change your mood, your perspective, or your life. The right song becomes an anthem that plays in our heads when we're screwing up our courage. For me, that's usually ludicrous. Or it's the lyrical explanation for the complex emotions caused by a breakup that sounds much better and much more profound when sung in 4-part harmony. No matter the motivation, music is an outlet, a force that builds us up or keeps us steady. It holds the capacity to move millions and to resonate with each individual. And every lyric, every note, every beat has the potential to share a message.
Women have used their music as a form of resistance for decades. Taking risks, singing the truth even when the world is telling you to shut up. I think music is one of the most powerful ways to put a message out there.
That voice, of course, is from the extraordinary Selena Gomez, speaking in a documentary that she and I co-produced called Louder, the Soundtrack of Change. The genesis of the idea is simple. We both share the belief that music is one of the most effective, transformative tools we have in advocacy. And for women, it's been a formidable weapon to fight for visibility and for change. Whether during elections or during protests that highlight the struggles in between, music provides a roadmap of what's at stake and why our voices matter. On this show, we focus on how we can build a toolkit that can help us navigate the difficult spaces, but also give us a sense of the possible. Like most of us, I have a playlist for each, and songs that can help me make it from one point to the next. We know what music can do. And that is inherently political, with a small p. But this is an industry that touches so much of our lived experiences, and how we are included often defines how we are viewed. Indeed, the music industry itself is a construct of the society we live in, meaning it's not free of limits, and it's certainly not free of inequalities. That's why when women or people of color are able to sing and sing louder to make themselves heard, it's worth taking note. Rhiannon Giddens is an artist who has consistently pushed boundaries, chafing against what's expected of her and against the constraints of the music industry, like its tendency to box singers into a genre. Here she is in the documentary.
Music itself is a great way to broach this topic of what is the story we've been told about America in a way that people can hear.
Rhiannon Giddens is first and foremost a singer and composer. Her list of awards proves how multifaceted her talents are, though. She's won Grammys, a Pulitzer, and the MacArthur Genius Grant. She founded the Carolina Chocolate Drops, where she was lead singer, fiddler, and banjo player. She's released albums, written an opera, and hosted a PBS show. Her voracious curiosity has led her to research and unearth the narratives of enslaved people across the U.S., and especially in her home state of North Carolina. And she is one of the most well-known contemporary banjo players, educating us about its history and its place in American music. I'm incredibly lucky that today, Rhiannon Giddens also joins me on Assembly Required. Thank you so much for being on Assembly Required, the one and only Rhiannon Giddens.
Oh my gosh. Hi, thanks for having me.
So for those who haven't, stalked your career or haven't heard your origin story, you attended the very prestigious North Carolina School for Math and Science, and then you attended Oberlin College, where you studied opera at the Oberlin Conservatory. You made this transition from the very structured world of opera to your very free-range approach to music. So for a lot of folks who are listening, they're here because we're taking these big problems, trying to figure out our point of entry. And one of the things that stop us is fear. So what was your biggest fear in making the leap from opera to, every other musical genre imagined by man and woman?
Well, that's not really kind of how I wasn't seeing it that way. I was working a day job, as most opera singers do right out of school. I was, doing corporate graphic design, actually, is what I ended up doing, self-taught. But when the scariest thing was actually just making the leap into full-time music. That was, and also the fact that when you go to opera school, I think things are changing now, but like they don't teach you how to have a career. They teach you how to sing the aria or or die gracefully on command. They don't really teach you how do you build a career? How do you eat while you're auditioning? Like all of these things, how do you best sort of parlay what you learned into something that will actually earn you money? And unfortunately, in our society, we ask our artists to be entrepreneurs and to, deal with the economic world. So we're not particularly great at it. So that was the scariest thing. It really was. Once I found the banjo and sort of left the world of opera, but not forever, I find out later. That was really the scariest thing, was kind of stepping out without a net and just figuring it out for myself. But it was the best training I could have possibly asked for. The opera world is very sort of regulated. It's like you audition, somebody else picks you, somebody else tells you where to do the show, what to do, how to do it. You get directed, and then of course, obviously your artistry, you are in control of that. But when you're a folk musician, I mean, it's like a lot of it is up to you. And that was a hard sort of start over, but it was, I learned a lot, and I've kind of used that time ever since.
So you just referenced the fact that you tried to abandon opera, but it found you again. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I always loved it. The reason I left opera wasn't really because I hated it. It was because I didn't like the world so much. It wasn't really for me. I'm a barefoot, no makeup girl, as you can tell. And that world is very, that, like I said, in 20 something years, a lot has changed. But like when I was in it, it was still very much kind of conservative, and how you could participate in it was very much, in the hands of other people. But I always loved it. And so I kind of kept it in my mind and my heart, and then was approached by the folks who run the Spoleto Festival, which is a beautiful music festival in Spoleto, South Carolina, in Charleston. And they asked me to write an opera. And I went, okay. And then I went, what am I doing? Oh my God. How did I get into this? But the story they asked me to represent on the operatic stage was one that I couldn't really turn down. So that's what I generally do, is that if the thing is right for me to do because it's connected to my mission in life, which is uncovering and highlighting forgotten or erased African-American stories, then I say yes. And then I usually have to figure out how to do it later, after I've said yes already. So after I've committed.
So when I was in high school, I was talking to a friend. I grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, before I moved to Georgia. And we were having this conversation about music, and I declared that I hated country music. And so instead of defending it or agreeing with me, she just said, why? And I didn't have an answer. So over the next few months, I made myself listen to every station on the FM dial for at least 3 days. And over time, I understood that, there were this range of musical styles and genres that I'd never given true consideration. And it turns out that among the genres, I loved country music and folk music and bluegrass. But I also instinctively understood that these were not the same. And one of your myriad talents is your ability to challenge the boundaries of genre. So I didn't know you in 1989 when I was exploring, although you would have been a great guide. So tell teenage Stacey, or anyone listening, what does it mean to be a folk singer? What does it mean to make a folk song? What are the defining characteristics? And how do you distinguish it from other relative genres?
Well, it's a really good question. And I will say, to start, in 1989, I didn't know any of this either. This has been something that I've come to as a young adult. I was in my early to mid 20s when I started learning what I've now learned a lot more about, which is that, well, first of all, folk music is just music made by people. And there's this idea of, commercial music and popular music and folk music. And I think really it's, what is the function of this music? And a lot of folk music has been written by folks to tell the story of most often people with not a lot of power, because, you know, classical and all of that stuff kind of takes care of the aristocracy. But for those of us who are working class, you know, folk music is that vehicle to tell our stories. And so you don't really get genre, like commercial genres, until the advent of the recording industry in the 1920s. And that's really, I call it the great segregation of American music, because before then you had styles, you had, you know, local style, you know, like this is this regional style, this is what they play over here, but it was pretty connected and people just played and listened to what they wanted to. And sometimes it was rural themes, you know, that most people who were still living in rural areas, like the movement to the urban centers, is really, that hadn't happened en masse yet, especially amongst the Black community. That was starting to happen with the Great Migration. So these kind of themes were really attractive to a lot of people. So it really is more like, oh, this is dance music, this is story music, this is community music. And then the music industry becomes a thing around the creation of the CD player, listen to me, the record player, cylinders, the record player. And then they go, well, we got to sell this stuff. So how do we sell it? Well, we're going to put it in a box. You know, we're going to say, we're going to go to these people, here's your music, we're going to sell it back to you. It's kind of crazy, right, like when you think about it. But I really think that is really where our concept of genre was sort of initially formed. And then each subsequent sort of fight, you know, there's hillbilly and race records, there's rock and roll and R&B, there's rap, you know what I mean? It's like, right, they keep reinforcing these divisions, these sort of fake divisions that they sort of tie to race, even though really in the beginning they weren't at all.
I mean, one of the reasons I thought about that story when I was preparing for this conversation was, for me, that I discovered I loved rock music, and I found out I'm not a huge fan of heavy metal, not because I don't like the sound, but because I like lyrics. So for me, the sort of distinguishing feature in the music I like was lyricism. But what you just said is part of the reason I wanted to do this episode, which is part of the way we understand ourselves as a nation, part of the way we enter the field of advocacy is by seeing that we have a role to play. And this artificial fracturing, as you laid it out, of our music has an influence on where we think we belong. And you once said that blues, jazz, country, it's all the same thing. It's all coming from the same American well of cross-cultural collaboration. Talk to me about why, for you, this was a necessary and, I would say in this moment, an extraordinarily relevant statement.
Because it shows us, for me, the American music in particular, right? Because American music is made up of the musics of people from all over the world, right? And it is a special thing, which is why people all over the world love American music, because they can see a bit of themselves in it, you know? So for me, it's like these divisions are deadly, because they allow us to be separated, they allow us to be controlled, they allow us to be not empathetic to other people by going, well, you're fundamentally different from me. Whereas the music, when you look at the history of the music, you take an instrument like the banjo, which is one of the reasons why I've used the banjo as an emblem of what I feel like is the American spirit, is that it's a great example. The banjo is an Afro-Caribbean invention by people of the African diaspora who were enslaved in the Caribbean. And then it becomes the absolute emblem of the white mountaineer, even though it was an instrument that everybody played the banjo. It was massively popular through the 1800s, the 1900s. And it's only like the last 50 years that we have this idea that it's only a particular kind of banjo and instrument and people who play it. But for me, it's like you have African invention, European ingenuity, and then this back and forth between all these different cultures taking bits of the banjo and changing it, and it becomes this uniquely American instrument. And that, to me, is how the music has come about, because it's like, whatever reason you ended up in America, whether you were coerced, whether you came of your own free will, but still from economic coercion, probably from, you know, your home country, you're living cheek by jowl with other poor people. And this is the music of poor people. And that's the thing that annoys me when people try to package it up and say, well, you can't have this, or that's over here. It's the music of people coming together, because you don't have all of these genres, country, folk, whatever, you don't have any of them without cross-cultural collaboration. You take one of the strands out, the whole thing collapses. So it's not all white, it's not all black, it's not all brown, it is a mixture. But we have to acknowledge the different strands that go into that, because that's how we go, oh, you don't look like me, but like I know that, all of our histories are tied together in this music.
So, one of the pieces of your story and how you engage music is that you understand music is not only entertainment, it's an historical record, it's a touchstone. And yet we continue to confront this debate about what that history actually is. And you've just given, I think, a seminar, master seminar on the history of how the lines were broken and how the stories got erased. But we're reaching this moment where we've got to start understanding our stories better if we want to figure out what happens next. So this is a very complicated way for me to ask, what else do we need to do or say to make progress in getting people to both credit and understand how we've shaped music, and what does that mean for how we shape our country going forward?
Well, I mean, for me, and this is why I have started emphasizing the working class, cross-cultural, collaborative aspects of this music. For me, it is understanding that as much of a construct of blackness is, so is whiteness. And that a lot of white Americans don't know their own history, or they pick one strand. And this idea that when you go back, we're all poor. You know what I mean? And everybody's got a story. And the more that we understand that, I think the more that we can empathize with other people's stories. I just think that's really super powerful, that the idea that this music is where people kept coming together. And then these genres come and they sort of, and you see it each time, every 20 years, it's like, and then people sneak over here and they sneak over there and they like join each other's recording sessions. And it's just, the history is all out there. These amazing academics have been doing this work so that I can sort of read their books and make gross overgeneralizations. But like, that's my job as a performer, because I'm a mixed race woman of the South. I grew up in the country. Before I moved to the city. I was like 8 or 9 when we moved to Greensboro. But like before then, I spent all of my time in McLeansville and in Julian. And there's black parts of the country and white parts of the country. But gosh, a lot of it is the same. Of course, how they're treated by people is not the same. And of course, there are, of course, important differences. But you talk about the rhythms of life. You're talking about when you don't have any money. It's shocking how much of that life is similar, and how much I recognize from each side, as much as, there were issues. There's always issues. But I just think that I see that in a way that leads me to see how much we are alike, and how much the differences are really, really tissue paper thin, but they are used in a way that make people think they're much bigger than they are. And I just think that music is something that is supposed to bring us together. Music is something that's supposed to heal us. Like when you think about the role of the musician, the artist, the prophet, the person who's supposed to see what has gone rotten in society, and they use their art, their poetry, their music to tell that. And we've been doing that since time immemorial. So it's like, just because money is involved in music right now, like that is part of the problem. And I think part of the reason why it's been hard to really connect to what music is supposed to be doing in our society, because there's so much money wrapped up in it. And people are scared. They're scared to say things because they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their ability to put gigs on. And I get it. I totally do. So we just do what we can.
You're not just doing what you can. You've sort of started paving your own roads. And one of the ways you've done that is where gender and race intersect. I had the privilege of spending, a few years getting to know Jessie Norman before she passed. And, there's a story of she's extraordinary. The story, for those who don't know Jessie Norman, she's this amazing opera singer, African-American from Augusta, Georgia. There's a story of Linda Martell, who is one of the first women to be like a powerful Black woman in country music. And then we can go through the litany where there are barriers and there are prejudices that infect how women can be a part of this cross-cultural collaboration. And as a woman of color, how do you decide where you're going to enter a musical genre? And what do you do to prepare yourself for being uninvited?
That's a really good question. I realized when I first started actually really getting out there and being, a working musician, it was with the band called the Carolina Chocolate Drops, which
Yes.
I created with Dom Flemons and Justin Robinson. We co-created this band that was really built around an elder's music. Joe Thompson, who was 86 when we met him, an African American fiddler, who was like, musical lineage goes back to the time of slavery. And so we were kind of his cultural heirs, his cultural and musical heirs. There are other people who've played his music, but like we were the first like young Black people to form a group around his repertoire. And so that's kind of catapulted us out into the world. But I was constantly surrounded by men and constantly, had to fight being put in front as the girl singer, but not as the banjoist. You know what I mean? I really fought that and fought that and fought that. And then I kind of got to a point where I just realized that I was reading slave narrative stories, and these stories of these women in particular were hitting me because I'm like, why don't we ever hear their stories? It's not just Harriet Tubman. Like, there's so many important Black women and women of color. And so I started realizing that's what started my songwriting, was that realization that I wanted to tell those stories. Like, we couldn't tell our stories in a way that, like, say, British ballads are very, they're very clear, linear. They tell the story of whatever happened. We couldn't do that because our lives were forfeit. So I started imagining, what if we could? How would I write a folk song from the 1800s, telling the actual story? And so that's what got me into writing anything, was wanting to pay homage to those generations of women of color who came before me so that I could tell their stories.
So, for an artist who's listening to you, who has this burning passion that she's sitting on because she is afraid of losing the commercial success, or she's concerned that this is not the right space when the call's coming from inside your house and inside your head, what do you do to convince yourself to break through, to keep doing something when that's not the expectation people have of you, or where the consequences of the songs that you write and the stories you tell could mean that you lose your job?
I mean, my mom always said to me, don't do anything for money, property, or prestige. Like, you have to do it for your purpose. You have to have a reason. And so I really held that close. And so within that, it's not just that. You have to, I think, stay centered on why you're doing this. For me, it's very clear. I'm here. I was literally put here on this earth to do this work. And it is work. It is a mission. It is something that my ancestors have prepared me to do. I really believe, believed that very strongly, the way that my life has rolled out. So that's what I stay on. So when something comes in, if it serves that, I do it. Now, of course, you have to think about, how much money I'm making so I can pay people. I mean, there's always economic considerations, but they should never be number one. And so if you can't walk away from it with your head held high, don't do it. Like, if you do something and somebody says, all right, you're canceled, and you can't go, you know what? I followed my conscience and I'll need to do something else. That's fine. Then I think that, I've never been afraid of shutting everything down and just being like, all right, I'm out. I also, though, pick my battles. I pick my battles so that I can use the power that I've been given. I save it for where I think I'm going to make the most difference. I'm not really a big fan of just getting on social media and just going, blah, blah, blah. There's a lots of things I think that I don't always say. Then there's sometimes I go, some people in that country, that strip of land that's being pummeled, like some of my friends need to see that I'm speaking up. You know what I mean? Like, there's different reasons why I say things, but it's not always to try to make things stop, because I can't make things stop. I can't make war stop. I can't make racism stop. But what I can do is use my art in a way that is positive, that is adding to the conversation. I could rant and rave, every day of the week on my social media, but that's not going to do anything like writing an opera about, a Quranic scholar from Senegal, right? That is doing something, and there's people who've given me the opportunity to do these things, to write these pieces, to showcase my songs, and people keep asking me to do it. So I guess for me, it's like, you got to know what story you're there to tell, why you're there to tell it. I don't do it for applause. I don't do it for the awards, although I say thank you. I put them on my shelf. I'm proud to have them, but I do it because I'm here to do that. I'm here to tell these stories. And it's hard. And I'm not complaining because Lord knows my life, I've got a good life, you know, but it runs everything. So it complicates things but I'm grateful for it. I wouldn't be in the music industry still if I didn't have that, to be honest with you, if I didn't have that, that strong center of why I'm doing this, I would be out. I would be gone. So I'm grateful for it, even though it's hard. I'm grateful for it because it keeps me centered around the things that matter to me.
Well, thank you. For those of us who are grateful that you stay here, thank you. I mean, one of the reasons I was so delighted to have you as a guest today is because, one, as I mentioned in our pre-call, I have followed your career since Tomorrow Is My Turn, and you know, I own your albums both on MP3 and on CD, which is a topic for another episode.
Yes. Great, very, very. Thank you for leading the way.
Yeah. Oh, but if you want to do a quick plug, buy CDs because it's one way to make sure that the artists actually make money off of their music.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's that.
Most people do not make anything off of streams. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We've talked about it before, but we'll do more. But you have always, you've used your voice and your complex vocals to challenge listeners. I mean, one of the reasons I loved your music and kept coming back to it is that you force thinking. It's not just I can turn on your albums and just like kind of fade. Yeah, listen. And you want to be there, and you're a little irritated that you're being confronted, but you're also grateful for it. And, earlier this year, for example, you recorded How I Long for Peace, which was originally written by folk singer, I think Peggy Seeger, with Chris Matthews and the Resistance Revival Chorus. And you did that for National Voter Registration Day. Thank you again. And you did it in partnership with Joy to the Polls and Headcount. You seem to understand at a visceral level why music is a tool for activism. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you here today. You understand that it's both a soundtrack, but it's also a galvanizer. And going again to origins, is there a song that first marked you because of its impact on how you viewed the world?
I mean, to be honest, my dad was, I guess he's probably not in any more given age. He was a hippie when my parents were hippies. That's how they met, and I was raised with the folk revival movement. So it was like a commercial sort of regathering of folk music. And it was very popular. And so I would have heard like, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? And these sorts of, Pete Seeger kind of things. And I think the song that I really, I was a kid. Well, there's two songs I'd say. One was the Civil War song, a girl singing to her love, who she's trying to convince him to take her with him to the battlefield. Just thinking about the people involved in these conflicts. So I'm a kid singing the song. I'm so, into it. And then the other song is a Tracy Chapman song. Last Night I Heard the Screaming, which is not what it's called. It's called The Wall, I think. Yeah. But that's the first line. I literally sang that in my 6th grade talent show, a cappella. I was mercilessly teased for this, but that's how I was, that in the 6th grade singing a song about domestic violence. But the power of a song that will get you into the person who's singing it, the perspective. And that song, it's like she's listening and she's hearing it and she's like, it's affecting her in this certain way. The power that music has to combine the words of somebody, in that situation or listening to that situation with the music that then cements it into your brain and sort of hits your whatever the animal part of your brain. It's really powerful. And I do have so many songs that as I've grown older that are activist songs. I was kind of primed from a very young age, I think.
Now, Behind the Wall is one of those songs that
Behind the Wall. That's it. Yeah.
Oh no. I love Tracy Chapman. So she's the other one I buy. One of the other ones. I'm in good company. I've got a group of folks. I've got everything. Brandy Clark, anything she prints, it goes into CD.
Amazing.
So Selena Gomez and I recently co-produced and released the documentary Louder, the Soundtrack of Change. And our goal was to trace the history of women in protest music and how we use song not only to tell our stories, but to call ourselves into action. One of the breakout stars in that documentary is yours truly, Rhiannon Giddens. You are featured prominently in part because of your ability to connect those dots. You know, we profile nearly every style of music from R&B to punk to folk to rock and beyond. Why did you agree to be interviewed?
I mean, it's the usual. It's, there something that's talking about something that's dear to my heart. So it's like I realize that I represent the genre, whatever you want to call it, the history, the era. I know a lot of things kind of intersect in me, and so I just want to be there for the cause. You know what I mean? And to try to tell the history of the banjo wherever I go, it's like literally my obsession, because I just believe so strongly in the beautiful way that it represents a larger story of America. So any opportunity to be also with like-minded people and to be put next to folks who are also doing that just in different ways was kind of irresistible. So I felt very honored to be asked.
Let's shift. So we're in the middle of this political moment. You mentioned earlier what you talk about versus what you don't talk about. Mm-hmm. But how do you respond to critics who say that artists should just make music and stay out of politics altogether?
First of all, everything is political. Life is political, right? So this idea that if you want to talk about something that means something, if you want to talk about something that affects people other than yourself, then that's politics. That's an issue. They're using it as a derogatory term. So that's number one. Number two, I'd say they don't know anything about art, because that's art's job. It's literally in the job description of artists, is to say the thing that needs to be said in a way. Like, the thing that I love about what I get to do is music is universal. It's a universal connection that it disarms people. And that's why I get angry when people use music to divide, because I'm like, that is the opposite of what music should be doing. Music is supposed to bring us together. I am an artistic director for the Silk Road Ensemble. And it's like when you see people from all over the world coming together, and maybe they don't all speak the same verbal language, or maybe they all speak varying degrees of, our lingua franca, which over here happens to be English, right? But they're all masters of their art. And the way that we talk is by listening louder than we speak. And that's what music gets you to do. So I really, really think that artists are supposed to do this. And so when people say shut up and sing, I'm just like, you have mistaken a commercial product for what we're trying to do. Like, that's not the end. That's not the end result of what art should be, is a consumable product for sale. It should be something that makes you think. It should be something that warms your heart. It should be something that makes you cry. It should be, I've had people over and over again with varying songs go, now I can cry. Like, it was like bananas when Silk Road's putting out a record, and the first single off of that, it's about the American Railroad. And so we're telling the story of the different oppressed folks who actually built the railroad. So Irish folks and Black folks and Chinese folks and all sorts of brown people. And the first single off that was Swannanoa Tunnel, which is about the convict laborer that built the tunnel through that pass of the Appalachian Mountains. And there was the cave in, and it became the song that became sort of a bluegrass standard and all this stuff. So that was the single. It was 2 days after Hurricane Helene when that came out. And it was like, and we still put it out because the whole thing was planned to put out. It had nothing to do with knowing that there was going to be a hurricane. But like, then it was a grieving song for the men who were lost in that tunnel collapse. But it became a grieving song for Swannanoa, which was like wiped off the map. Somebody was like, oh, now I can cry. Or this is like, you know what I mean? Music like creates emotional pathways from person to person, from person to their, innermost emotional self. We do the best job we can. So music is supposed to destroy all that. Like, it's supposed to just like skip all of the business and go straight to the heart. And that's what it's for. That's why I like to not say a bunch of stuff. I like to do it. I like to put it in the music. I like to put it in the opera. I like to put it in the ballet. I like to put it in the songs, into the music, into, the art. And then that has a life of its own. A statement on Twitter. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not to say that those aren't platforms that aren't important, but for what I'm doing, I feel like I'm doing it, and I'm just going to keep doing it, as much as I can.
So the album you reference is called American Railroad. It is coming out on November 15th. And one of the things we like to do here on Assembly Required are call to actions. In fact, we recently had an episode on extreme weather events where we talked about Hurricane Helene, Hurricane Milton, and just the disasters, and specifically what it means in terms of what happened in North Carolina. So what should folks who are listening do if they want to help out?
Folks should go to the reputable places to see what is needed right now. Go to your national, like Red Crosses and all that stuff. That's fine and everything, but you don't know how much of that's actually going to get to what's happening in North Carolina. And this is going to be months, years, decades probably of a recovery. So if you want to wait and see, okay, what can I do later? You want to do some now? It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. There's a lot of places on the ground, beloved Asheville, for example. The Blue Ridge NPR station has a really lovely list of places that they kind of continually update. The needs will shift. So I think just thinking for a second and not just donating to maybe usual places, going to finding one of these websites like Blue Ridge, the NPR Blue Ridge station, or beloved Asheville, and just trying to go, what is it that I can give here? What can I do here? Don't go there until they're ready. Just kind of like educate yourself about what people are saying about what they need, because it is massive. I have a lot of friends in the area, and the needs are huge, from like potable water to getting dug out of the side of a mountain, getting property cleared, to highways that are destroyed. I mean, it's just, it runs the gamut. So I just say always be aware of where you're donating. Try to get as local as you can and try to figure out what is needed in this moment.
Thank you. So last two questions. So we're going to widen out a bit. Today's conversation, and the reason you were the perfect guest, was I wanted to talk about the importance of music as a tool for activism, as a tool for action. And as I said, we like to give folks a call to action, and you just laid out a beautiful one when it comes to recovering from the hurricane and the storms. What else can our audience do to advance the work of music as a tool for activism?
Our society is set up, for distraction, for consumerism, for individualism. And so the idea of being collective, one of the things that music does is brings us together as a choir. That was the power of music in the civil rights movement in the 60s. In terms of the music, I want to hear people sing. Every time in my show, I always end with something where everybody sings together, because that's really where it's at. It's really hard to hate somebody that you're singing with, that you're making music with, that you're agitating the molecules together and creating harmony. And the nice thing about a choir, I think we have to become, if we're talking about activism and trying to make our country a more equitable place for more people, we have to become a choir, which means when you're in a choir, and I don't remember where I saw this, I saw this as a quote, and you run out of breath, what happens? You have to stop singing and pick it up again after you've breathed, but the sound continues because the person next to you is still singing. Right? So we all have to figure out what is our piece that we're uniquely situated to help. And sometimes we don't know what that is. We have to kind of, I sort of did that. I was like, oh, I'm going to try this. And then when you find it, it's just stick to it, instead of trying to be all things to all people. And I lean into it, and somebody else's job is to rally the folks, and just knowing where your unique gifts that you've been given fit, and then creating a group of people whose stuff that they do kind of fits with yours. And the more that we do that, we kind of create this web then that can stand somebody falling from a building onto it. You know what I mean? We can all catch a little bit of that person instead of one of us getting smashed underneath.
You have actually given me fantastic response, because Rhiannon Giddens, you are now the honorary director of the Assembly Required Choir. And we thank you for your service.
All right, let's go.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Each week, we want to leave the audience with a new way to act against what can feel inevitable, an opportunity to make a difference, a way to get involved, or just get started on working on a solution, in a segment we like to call Our Toolkit. At Assembly Required, we encourage the audience to be curious, solve problems, and do good. To learn more, check out the documentary I produced with Selena Gomez, Louder, the Soundtrack of Change. It's available now to stream on Max. Enjoy the remarkable untold stories, the incredible footage, and the unforgettable music. And be inspired by interviews with really smart musicians and journalists, all about how women in music challenge us and change the world. One problem we've been discussing is supporting victims of Hurricane Helene. If you loved hearing from Rhiannon Giddens, then support her work with the Silk Road Ensemble and buy the album American Railroad when it comes out on November 15th. Go to silkroad.org for more information. And you can help independent musicians earn more whenever possible if you opt to buy the physical copy and not just the download. If you want to do just a bit more good, plan ahead for Biscuits and Banjos, a festival Giddens is organizing in April of next year, dedicated to the reclamation and exploration of Black music, art, and culture in her home state of North Carolina. That's at biscuitsandbanjos.com. Lastly, we want to hear from you. We're gathering listener questions and comments about the election, and we hope to tackle that in the next episode. So please send us an email at assemblyrequired@crooked.com or leave us a voicemail or text us at 213-293-9509. What lingering questions do you have about the election and about what comes next? Or do you have stories to share from Election Day that we'd love to hear? That wraps up this episode of Assembly Required with Stacey Abrams. Meet you here next week.